In this video, we're learning how to factor polynomials using the GCF, or the greatest common factor. And if you haven't already done so, I encourage you guys to watch our other video that explains how to find the greatest common factor of monomials, because you're going to have to understand those concepts in order to understand this video. So if you've already watched our other video, then we're ready to jump into example 1, which is 4x cubed plus 12x squared. So what I want to start by doing is actually finding the greatest common factor. So the way I'm going to do that is by writing out each term as a product of its prime factors. So 4 can be written as 2 times 2, and x cubed can be written as x times x times x. And now we're going to do 12x squared. So 12 is the same as 4 times 3, and we know 4 can be written as 2 times 2. So 12 is 2 times 2 times 3, and x squared is x times x. Now we're going to circle what they have in common in order to find the greatest common factor. So they've got 2 2's in common, and they've got 2 x's in common. So down here we're going to write the greatest common factor, which is going to be all of the factors they have in common multiplied together. So they have 2 2's and 2 x's. If we multiply this out, 2 times 2 is 4, x times x is x squared. So we know the greatest common factor is 4x squared. So now what we want to do is factor that out. So we're going to pull it out. So we're going to have 4x squared on the outside, and we have to figure out what's going to be left in our parentheses. And we can actually do this by looking at what's left over, what we didn't circle, when we wrote these terms out as the product of their factors. So for 4x cubed, we didn't circle this x. So if we take out the 2 times the 2 times the x times the x, we're still going to be left with this x that's circled in blue. So we're going to be left with an x in here. And then we're going to do a similar thing for the 12x squared. We didn't circle this 3, so we're still going to be left with this 3. And it's a positive 3 because this is a plus here. So it'll be x plus 3. So when we factor our expression, we get 4x squared times the quantity of x plus 3. And now I'm just going to show you guys how you can check your work. So factoring is pretty much the opposite of distributing. So if we want to check that we're correct, we can redistribute this 4x squared back in. So if we distribute, 4x squared times x is 4x cubed, because x squared times x is x cubed. And if we distribute the 4x squared into the 3, 4x squared times positive 3 is just a positive 12x squared. So we get our original expression, so we know that we're correct. Let's take a look at example 2. So example 2 is similar, but now we have 3 terms. So we're going to do the same thing, we just have to do it for 3 terms. So let's write 15a to the 5th as the product of its prime factors. So 15 can be written as 3 times 5. A to the 5th is just 5 a's multiplied together. 6a to the 4th can be written as 3 times 2 for 6, and then a to the 4th is going to be 4 a's multiplied together. And then we have 9a to the 2nd. 9 can be written as 3 times 3. A to the 2nd is just 2 a's multiplied together. And now let's circle what they have in common. So they've got 1 3 in common, and they've got 2 a's in common. So we're going to write down our greatest common factor, which is going to be the 3 multiplied by the 2 a's, which is the same as 3a squared. And now down here, I'm going to write the factored form of our answer. So we're going to pull out a 3a squared, and now we have to figure out what we're going to be left with for each of our terms. So for the 15a to the 5th, we're going to look at what's left. What did we not circle when we were finding the greatest common factor? So we didn't circle the 5 and these 3 a's, so we'd be left with 5 times a to the 3rd. So we're going to put a 5 times a to the 3rd in here. And now let's do the same thing for this 6a to the 4th. We have this 2, and we have 2 a's multiplied together, which is 2a squared. And because we were subtracting 6a to the 4th, we're going to subtract in here. So we have minus 2a squared. And then finally, let's see what we're left with this 9a squared. So we're just left with a 3. We pulled out everything else. So we'll just write 3. So we have a positive 3 because we had a plus 9a squared. So this is what we get as our factored form, and now we're just going to check. So let's check. So I'll rewrite it so we can distribute it out. If we distribute this 3 in, 3 times 5 is 15. A squared times a to the third is a to the fifth. You add the exponents. Distribute the 3a squared into the negative 2a squared. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. A squared times a squared is a to the fourth. Again, you add the exponents. And 3a squared times positive 3, we're just going to multiply 3 by 3 to get 9. And then we have this a squared tacked on. So we get our original expression, so we know that our factored form is correct. Let's go through 2 examples that involve multiple variables. So if we look at example 3, we have 5x squared y cubed minus 10x to the fourth y squared. So we have 2 variables this time, but we're going to do a similar thing. So we're going to write out each term as a product of its prime factors. 5 is prime, so we're just going to leave it as is. X squared can be written as x times x. Y cubed can be written as y times y times y. And now let's write 10x to the fourth y squared as a product of factors. So 10 is the same as 5 times 2. X to the fourth is x times x times x times x. Y squared is y times y. And now let's circle what they have in common. So they've got a 5 in common, and they've got 2 x's in common, and they've got 2 y's in common. So I'll circle the y's over here. So now let's write down our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor is going to be the 5 they have in common multiplied by the 2 x's they have in common multiplied by the 2 y's they have in common, which simplifies to 5x squared y squared. So when we factor it, we're going to pull out the 5x squared y squared. Now we need to figure out what we're left with. So for the 5x squared y cubed, we're going to look at what we were left with. So we were just left with this y right here. So I'll just write this goes to y. So we're just going to put a y in this part of our parentheses. And this is a little bit too far away. And then for the negative 10x to the fourth y squared, we were left with this 2 and these 2 x's, which is going to be 2x squared. And because we were originally subtracting 10x to the fourth y squared, we're going to subtract this in our parentheses, so minus 2x squared. And now we're just going to redistribute it out to make sure that we get the correct answer. So let's check our work. So let's rewrite our factored form, and then I'm going to distribute it out. So if I distribute this in, 5x squared y squared times y. So 5 isn't being multiplied by any number other than 1, so it stays as 5. X squared isn't being multiplied by another x, so it's just x squared. Y squared times y is y to the third. And now let's distribute this 5x squared y squared into the negative 2x squared. So we're going to have minus 5 times 2 is 10. X squared times x squared is x to the fourth. Y squared isn't being multiplied by y, so it stays as is. So because we get our original expression, we know that our factored form is correct. So let's go through one more example. And for this last example, I encourage you guys to pause the video and try it on your own, and then you can watch me work through it to make sure you've done it correctly. So we've got 3 terms. So let's write each of them as the product of their factors. 8 is the same as 2 times 2 times 2. A squared is a times a. B squared is b times b. For 6a cubed b, 6 is the same as 2 times 3. A cubed is a times a times a. B is just b. And finally we have 4a to the fourth. 4 can be written as 2 times 2, and a to the fourth can be written as the product of 4 a's. So now let's circle what they have in common. For the numbers, they just have 1, 2 in common. And for the letters, they have 2 a's in common. And they don't all have a b in them, so because the third term doesn't have a b in it, we can't put a b in our greatest common factor. So our greatest common factor is going to be the 2 they have in common times the 2 a's, which is 2a squared. So now we're going to factor that out. We're going to pull out a 2a squared and we want to see what we're left with. So for this 8a squared b squared, we're left with 2 times b, which is, 2 times 2 is 4, b times b is b squared. So we're going to have a 4b squared in the first spot in our parentheses. For this positive 6a cubed b, we're left with a 3 times a times b, which is just 3ab. And that's going to be positive because we were adding the term initially, so plus 3ab. And finally, for our last term, the negative 4a to the fourth, we are left with a 2 and then a times a, which is 2a squared. And we're going to subtract this because we were originally subtracting the 4a to the fourth, so minus 2a squared. And now let's just check our work to make sure that we're correct. So let me quickly rewrite this. And let's distribute. So 2a squared times 4b squared, we're going to multiply 2 by 4 to get 8. A squared times b squared is just a squared b squared. We can't combine them because they're different letters. And now 2a squared times 3ab, we're going to multiply 2 by 3 to get 6. A squared times a is a cubed. B is just b. And finally 2a squared times negative 2a squared. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. A squared times a squared, we're going to add the exponents to get a to the fourth. This is what we originally had, so we know we're correct. So our answer is correctly factored. So hopefully this video helped you guys understand how to factor polynomials using the GCF. If you want some more practice with problems similar to this, check out the link in our description for a free practice worksheet.